Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in for my talk, which will be about food sharing future scenarios. My name is Louise Fitzgerald, and I'm a current postdoctoral researcher on the SHARECITY team. So just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about today, I'll first give an introduction to futuring food sharing. Then I'll place this in context of SHARECITY research to date. I'll then discuss the approach to futuring which we'll be using, and 3 dimensions to be sensitive of in futuring food sharing in our urban environments. Finally, I'll outline 3 scenarios for the future of food sharing, and then share some reflections and outline next steps of the SHARECITY project, as well as then some concluding remarks. So when we look around us, it's clear that there's increased attention and need for futuring when we see the many complex and dynamic trends taking place. When we think about climate change and increasing inequality, we understand that there's a need to think more meaningfully and systematically about the future and how we might address these issues going forward. Looking, for example, to urbanization and climate change, we might ask, what do we want our future cities to be? And what is the role of food sharing in addressing social and environmental challenges in our urban environments? Looking also to technological innovation, what does this provide for urban food sharing in the future? What are the challenges and opportunities as technology comes to increasingly interact with food production and practices around the consumption of food? Futuring is about exploring and seeking to make sense of these many complex and dynamic trends taking place. Placing this in the context of SHARECITY research to date, SHARECITY has identified in different urban environments how food sharing has significant social and environmental benefits. As Amnesia described in her talk in day 2, there are particular challenges that food sharers face that have been identified by SHARECITY, such as governance challenges, essentially revolving around rule-based challenges resulting from a regulatory environment that is mismatched with food sharing activities, which essentially works to undermine the efforts of food sharers to address serious social and environmental challenges within our urban environments. Importantly, SHARECITY also understands food sharing as social practices. So it's important to examine the tools, skills, and understandings around food sharing activities. How are these practices evolving now, and how might they evolve in the future going forward? In order to explore these questions, we'll use the 3 Horizons framework. 3 Horizons is a simple and intuitive tool for thinking about the future. It draws attention to the different futures already existing in the present, represented by horizons, as I'll speak about shortly, and contained within patterns and practices we see all around us. The framework was developed by Bill Sharp and others and is accessible on the h3uni.org website, which I really recommend that you all check out if you're interested in using this tool in your work going forward. Using SHARECITY research to date, such as the insights gained in the Sharing Futures workshop, which were talked about in day 2, and as well as the in-depth ethnographies that were talked about and case studies in day 1, we will use this to develop future scenarios around food sharing in our urban environments. Also, we will develop these scenarios with reference to broader trends, such as social and technological innovation, which will inevitably impact food sharing and shape food sharing going forward. So the 3 Horizons framework is represented visually, as we can see here, and I'll talk us through the various elements. So firstly, Horizon 1, which is the red line, is the managerial view. It's business as usual patterns with dominant actors and familiar approaches. Horizon 3, represented here in green, is the visionary view. This is about questioning assumptions and transformative change. Horizon 2, represented in blue, is the entrepreneurial view. It's a zone of innovation and highly turbulent as different things are tried out. Some of these entrepreneurial innovations get eaten up by Horizon 1, by business as usual. We would call these Horizon 2 minus innovations. But importantly, some of these entrepreneurial innovations contribute to transformative change, and we would call these Horizon 2 plus innovations. The x-axis represents time and how these patterns are changing over time, and the y-axis is the strategic fit. And as we can see, Horizon 1, business as usual, is increasingly losing its strategic fit. It's increasingly not fit for purpose. In thinking through this, there are three dimensions that I think we need to be sensitive to and cognizant of in futuring work. The first is the dimension of time. The challenges faced by food sharers now are not static, but will compound into the future. So for example, a lack of secure space in which to conduct food sharing activities, be they growing or cooking and eating food together, these will increase over time. So if there's no spaces to conduct food sharing activities, how will food sharing activities be secure and be expanded in urban environments going forward? So Three Horizons appreciation of time helps us to underline the need for changes to policy to support food sharing activities, for example. The second dimension is power. So forces of incumbency and lock-in of dominant food system can inevitably undermine our ability to make transformative shifts. One important and perhaps the most important way of addressing this is through the inclusion of plural and diverse voices into food policy in urban environments. Food sharers need to be meaningfully included in policy-making practices. And this will work to counterbalance those dominant voices which usually prevail around food policy in urban and other environments. Finally, there is the dimension of agency. So in recognizing that the future can already exist and be seen in the practices which we see now, we can understand that everyone is a potential agent of change in being able to influence these practices and patterns and being able to contribute positively to those which are going to be the transformative changes that we need going forward. So from this, we can develop a number of scenarios. Scenario one is understood as the challenge and transform scenario. Within this, some innovations may be captured, but importantly, a lot of them in the entrepreneurial innovation zone lead to transformative changes. This may occur through new alliances being formed by those existing in this Horizon 2 plus zone, which leads to a shift in practices and assumptions, and ultimately a more diverse food environment in urban context, in which food sharing is an important player. This might include, for example, and has been highlighted in sharing city outputs elsewhere, to a commoning of food, a move away from a commodification of food in urban environments, and food sharers coming together to enable this. As has also been outlined in other Share City outputs, this might also include technology having an important role, which it enables trust to be built across diverse groups, across bigger groups, and ultimately allow for the expansion of food sharing activities in urban environments. Scenario two is the collapse and slow recovery scenario. Within this, innovation is curtailed, such as through a lack of timely and strategic policy in order to support food sharing activities, which results ultimately in a failure to transition to a more sustainable food system. As I said before, Horizon 1, the business as usual, is losing its strategic fit. This means that our food system is highly vulnerable and not resilient to external shocks. And this ultimately leads to an abrupt collapse in the system, leading to chaotic and hard to predict outcomes with significant social and sustainability impacts. This is the scenario that many of us are concerned about, that if practices around food and if the food system more generally isn't fundamentally changed, then there will be some form of collapse in the food system, which will impact people in urban environments in accessing food. And again, this highlights the need for food policy which facilitates more diverse and fair urban food systems in which food sharing can play a meaningful role. Scenario 3 is the capture and extension scenario. Within this, innovation towards sustainability and sharing are incremental and captured by business as usual. For example, this might include efforts to make our city environments more sustainable and resilient, being driven by tech and for-profit innovations. This could include, for example, privately owned, tech-led indoor vertical farming, or food sharing being capitalized on in order to generate profit, rather than leading to any significant disruption in our current relations around food. These share the same business as usual assumptions based on a need for control and profit and GDP driven innovation and the dominance of commercial relations. And as such, in sharing business as usual in assumptions, these innovations are easily captured by business as usual, resulting in significant social and environmental impacts, and due to the overall delay in a transformative shift to that more visionary Horizon 3 view. Moving to some reflections, 3 Horizons is a useful framework for thinking about futures based on practices that we can see now. There are, of course, some limitations. It may not be possible to see or understand or comprehend the different futures that are existing in present day practices. As such, it's perhaps best understood as a framework that can help us understand what could happen in the future and to help us to be more future orientated. In order to address this limitation, we will likely seek out further input and data in the development of our scenarios. So different perspectives and insights as to what practices are existing now and what they might mean going forward into the future. If you have any thoughts or insights or any information that you would like to share to support the development of these scenarios, please do feel free to get in contact, and my email is on the screen right now. The next step for ShareCity in these scenario development is also the development of visualization of these different scenarios as outlined with an artistic illustrator. We hope these will make our scenarios more accessible, understandable, and help it resonate with people. We will communicate these visualizations as part of efforts to increase engagement with our Share It tool, as Alwyn and Stephen have spoken about in day 2. And these processes will also support the development of a manifesto around food sharing and what processes can support more sustainable food sharing going forward. So thinking about the future is important for food sharing going forward. In order for food sharing activities to be secure and hopefully expanded in urban environments into the future, we have to start thinking more meaningfully about the future and what steps we need to take. Some versions of the future, as outlined, are more desirable than others, and which of these becomes the future depends on what action we take now. So we need to be really clear about what future we want to come into being and what steps we need to take to make that possible. Importantly, everyone can play a role in realizing these futures, and every one of you, based on your unique role, interest, and passion, can play a part in bringing these more positive futures into being. Again, thank you so much for listening, and please do feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.